before the storm. The night before we sailed for Iwo Jima, I stood on the deck staring at a horizon that seemed endless. The ocean was calm, but beneath that calm I could feel a weight pressing on every man aboard. We were heading toward history, and each of us knew it. I thought of the quiet towns we had left behind, the families that believed in us, and the faith that we carried like armor. War had changed me once before at Guadalcanal, and I knew it would again. The sea breeze smelled of salt and oil, and for a moment it reminded me of home. I held on to that memory, knowing I might need it soon. Courage is never loud before the fight. It whispers in the heart of a man who has already made peace with fate. When dawn rose, it painted the fleet in silver light, and I saw the scale of our purpose. Ships stretched far into the horizon, each one carrying men ready to give everything. I walked among them, feeling their nervous energy, hearing laughter that tried to hide fear. We all knew what waited beyond the waves. I polished my gear like it was a sacred ritual, a way to steady trembling hands. Some wrote letters, others prayed, and a few just stared at the sea, silent and still. I told them what I truly believed. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's walking forward despite it. And that morning we all walked forward together. As the engines roared to life, I felt the deck vibrate beneath my boots. Every sound became sharper, every breath heavier. The horizon grew closer, and with it, the realization that we were part of something larger than ourselves. I thought of the men who had fought before us, whose stories shaped the very soil we stood on. That thought brought a strange comfort. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of not doing enough. Every Marine I looked at carried that same burden. We weren't fighting for glory. We were fighting so that others would never have to. The noise of the sea mixed with the hum of engines, and in that symphony of steel I felt ready. Before we reached the island, I gathered my men and spoke quietly. There was no grand speech, no rehearsed words, just truth. I told them to trust in each other, to remember their training, and to hold on to their humanity no matter what came next. They listened in silence, their faces calm but their eyes alive with unspoken thoughts. In moments like that, words were only bridges to courage. What mattered most was the bond between us. When you've shared fear with another man, you share something deeper than friendship. You share the kind of brotherhood that only war can forge. And that brotherhood was the one thing I knew would outlast the battle. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay in my bunk, listening to the hum of the ship and the distant laughter from men pretending they weren't scared. I thought about home again, about Lena's smile, about the life I wanted to return to. Every soldier carries a piece of home in his heart. It's what gives him strength when nothing else does. I prayed quietly, not for victory but for peace, not just for myself, but for every man out there, friend or foe. Because deep down I knew the truth. We were all just trying to survive the storm. And as I closed my eyes, I made a promise to do everything I could to bring my brothers home. Morning came with the sound of orders echoing through the corridors. The island was close now, hidden by mist and the haze of anticipation. I could see it in the distance, dark, rough, unyielding. Iwo Jima. Even from afar it looked defiant, as if daring us to set foot on it. The air was thick with tension, but there was also a strange calm among us, the kind that comes when there's no turning back. Every Marine prepared in his own way. Some whispered to themselves, some stared into nothing. I tightened my helmet strap and took a deep breath. History wasn't waiting. It was already unfolding before us. As the fleet slowed, the sound of waves against steel became steady and haunting. Officers moved across the deck, their voices low, measured. The younger Marines looked at me, searching for reassurance, for something to believe in. I gave them a nod and a few quiet words. We'd trained for this. We were ready. But readiness and reality are never the same. I could feel the pulse of fear beneath their steady hands. It reminded me that courage isn't something you find, it's something you choose. And that morning, each of us made that choice without speaking a word. When I looked back one last time, the horizon behind us glowed gold with the rising sun. It was beautiful, almost cruel in its serenity. I thought of all the men who wouldn't see another sunrise and felt a chill that no warmth could reach. But then I remembered why we were here, to protect, to defend, to honor every name and face we carried in our hearts. The island ahead was not just rock and sand. It was a test of everything we believed in. And as I gripped my rifle, I whispered to myself, let's finish what we started. Landing, we moved toward the landing craft at first light, the air heavy with mist and diesel. The sea rolled beneath us like a restless giant, whispering promises we didn't want to hear. I felt the weight of my pack pressing into my shoulders and the quiet heartbeat of every man beside me. No one spoke much. Words felt fragile now. Each of us carried our own prayers, tucked between fear and faith. I remember thinking how strange it was that courage could feel so calm. The shoreline waited ahead, unseen but certain like a destiny carved in sand. I kept my thoughts on the men, not the mission. Sometimes leading means pretending you're not afraid. The engines roared, and the small craft shuddered as we cut through the waves. Salt spray hit my face sharp and cold, and I tasted the ocean like iron on my tongue. Every second stretched, an endless rhythm of hope and resolve. I looked at the faces around me, boys turned into soldiers by necessity. Their eyes held 1,000 questions I couldn't answer. The closer we drew, the more I thought about duty, not as orders but as love. Love for the country, for the brothers beside me, for the idea that freedom was worth every heartbeat we gave. That thought steadied me more than any weapon ever could. When the signal came to brace, time seemed to pause. My grip tightened on the metal edge of the craft, and I whispered a small prayer for clarity. The world narrowed to sound and breath, the rush of water, the hum of the engine, the steady thrum of my pulse. In those moments before stepping into history, everything else fades. The noise of doubt, the memory of fear. All that remains is purpose. I thought of Lena's voice, of the laughter I'd known, and promised myself I'd see that light again, not for glory, for home, always for home. As the ramp dropped, sunlight spilled across the deck, blinding for a heartbeat. My boots met the sand, soft and unfamiliar beneath the weight of everything we carried. The air smelled of salt and smoke from distant ships. Around me, men moved with practiced rhythm, each step a promise to one another. The island loomed ahead, silent and waiting. I could feel the pulse of history in my chest. This was more than a mission. It was a moment that would define us long after we were gone. I whispered almost without thinking, "Hold steady, Marines," and we did. We advanced slowly, every sense alive. The sky above felt vast and empty, as if the world itself were holding its breath. My thoughts drifted between discipline and prayer, between the calm of training and the chaos I knew waited somewhere ahead. I remembered Guadalcanal, the mud, the exhaustion, the faces of men who'd never see home again. Those memories didn't haunt me. They guided me. They reminded me what strength truly meant. Not the absence of fear, but the refusal to surrender to it. Each step on that island was a testament to every man who'd walked before us. At one point, I caught sight of a young Marine, couldn't have been more than 19, clutching a photo of his family tucked in his sleeve. He glanced at me, his expression steady but uncertain. I gave him a nod, the kind that said, "You're not alone." That's what leadership is, I've learned. Not speeches, not medals, but the small gestures that keep men believing. For all our weapons and training, belief was our greatest armor. And as the morning stretched on, that belief carried us forward, one steady breath at a time. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the sand. My uniform clung to me, heavy with salt and sweat. I could feel the fatigue setting in, that familiar dull ache that comes from carrying more than your share of weight, both physical and unseen. Still, I pressed on. Every Marine did. We'd come too far, sacrificed too much to falter now. In moments of exhaustion, I remembered why we fought, for the promise that freedom endures, that courage outlives fear. Those thoughts became the rhythm of my steps, a quiet march that echoed through my soul. By afternoon, the horizon shimmered with heat and haze, but our resolve never wavered. I watched the men find strength in one another, the kind born only in hardship. The sound of the sea behind us felt distant, almost forgotten. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also purpose. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the heavy air of the island, and said quietly to myself, "We hold the line." It wasn't a command, it was a promise. And promises, once spoken, are sacred things. Holding the line as the day wore on, the air around us grew thick with heat and tension. Every step forward felt like a test of will, every heartbeat a reminder of how fragile courage could be. I could see it in the eyes of the men, determination shadowed by exhaustion, fear tempered by resolve. We'd come too far to turn back, and in that realization something quiet and powerful bound us together. I thought about how bravery isn't born from glory, but from necessity. You don't wake up wanting to be a hero. You just refuse to run when it matters most. And in that choice, everything changes. There was a strange stillness that settled between moments of chaos. The wind carried the scent of sulfur and salt, and the distant rumble of ships reminded us that we weren't alone. I found myself staring at the horizon again, at that endless blue line that promised home but offered none of its comfort. War teaches you how to live in fragments, seconds, breaths, heartbeats. Each one becomes precious, because you never know when it might be your last. I clung to those small moments, a glance between brothers, a steady nod, a memory of laughter before the storm. Those fragments became my strength. As the sun began to fade, the world turned golden and strange. Shadows stretched long over the ground, and the light softened everything, even the hardest edges of the day. It was in that fading glow that I remembered the faces of my old unit from Guadalcanal, men who'd fought beside me, laughed beside me, and never came home. I wondered if they'd be proud of what we were doing here. Maybe they were watching, somewhere beyond the noise and chaos, reminding us that honor is found not in victory, but in endurance. I whispered their names like a prayer and kept moving forward. That night, we dug in as the stars returned to the sky. I lay on the rough ground, my hands dirty and trembling, my thoughts drifting between exhaustion and reflection. I thought about what it meant to serve, to give everything for something unseen. Patriotism isn't loud. It's quiet and enduring. It lives in the silent choices of men who stand their ground when the world demands retreat. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine home, the laughter of neighbors, the music of distant radios, the sound of freedom itself. Those memories became my sanctuary in the dark. Sleep didn't come easily. The island seemed to hum with a kind of restless energy, as if it remembered every step we took upon it. I lay awake, staring at the stars, feeling the weight of everything unsaid. In war you learn that silence speaks louder than words. It tells you when to move, when to listen, when to hope. I thought about Lena, wondering if she was looking at the same sky, praying the same prayer. It gave me comfort to believe she was. Love, even from miles away, has a way of finding you in the loneliest places. Morning came quietly, painting the horizon in soft gold once more. I rose and stretched, feeling every muscle protest but refusing to slow down. Around me the men stirred, faces drawn but steady. We didn't need speeches, we needed purpose. I reminded them that we were part of something sacred, the defense of freedom, the protection of those who couldn't fight for themselves. That truth was enough. It was more than enough. Every Marine knew it in his bones. The flag on our shoulders wasn't just fabric. It was a promise to everyone back home that we would not falter. As we moved forward again, I noticed how the men had changed. Fear had been replaced by focus, hesitation by quiet determination. They had grown into something larger than themselves. Watching them, I felt both pride and humility. Leadership isn't about commanding others. It's about inspiring belief when belief feels impossible. Each man carried his own burden, his own story, and yet we all moved as one. That unity gave me strength. It reminded me that courage, when shared, multiplies. And with every step, I knew we were writing a story that would outlive us all. By evening, we reached higher ground and paused to rest. The view stretched wide, the ocean shimmering behind us, the land stretching forward like a challenge. I sat there breathing deeply, feeling the ache of fatigue settle into my bones. Yet beneath it there was peace, the kind that comes from knowing you've done everything you could. I thought about tomorrow, about the days still ahead, and I whispered a quiet promise to the men who had fallen before me. We'll finish what you began. The wind carried my words away, but I knew they'd been heard. Days of endurance. The days began to blend together in a blur of effort and endurance. The sun was relentless, beating down on our helmets until every thought felt heavy. Time stopped being measured in hours and became something else. Moments of movement, moments of rest, moments of quiet resolve. I learned to appreciate the smallest details. The sound of boots crunching in rhythm, the shared nod between men who no longer needed words. Fatigue was constant, but so was purpose. We weren't just surviving. We were proving that conviction could outlast exhaustion. That belief gave the island a strange kind of light, even beneath the clouds. Each sunrise carried a new lesson. Some were lessons in patience, others in gratitude. I found myself looking at the faces of my Marines and realizing that strength doesn't always look like confidence. Sometimes it's a trembling hand that still reaches forward, a whispered "we'll make it" when no one else believes. Those moments taught me more about courage than any medal ever could. I had seen bravery before, but here it felt raw, almost sacred. I wanted to remember it forever. The way determination could turn ordinary men into symbols of hope. Letters from home arrived sporadically, carried by tired couriers who understood their weight. I received one from Lena, written weeks before we landed. Her words were simple, filled with faith and love, untouched by the darkness around us. She wrote about the smell of coffee in the morning, the neighbors' laughter, the little things that make life worth fighting for. I read that letter more times than I could count. It reminded me of what we stood for, not conquest, not pride, but the preservation of those simple joys. Every time I folded it back into my pocket, I felt stronger. By the fourth day, I noticed how the men had stopped talking about fear. It wasn't that it disappeared. It had simply become part of the rhythm, accepted and transformed. I could see in their faces a quiet understanding that life itself was fragile, but purpose made it radiant. That's something war can't take away, the dignity of conviction. Even in hardship, even in silence, that spirit burns. I thought about how history might remember us, and I hoped it would be for our resolve, not our suffering. We wanted to leave behind proof that freedom is always worth the weight it demands. One evening, as dusk settled over the horizon, we shared what food we had left and spoke in low voices. Someone asked what I missed most about home. I said the noise. It surprised them at first, but I explained, home has the kind of noise that comforts you. Laughter, music, the sound of life continuing. Out here, silence ruled everything. Yet even in that silence I found meaning. It forced me to listen, to my own heartbeat, to the unspoken promises between brothers, to the echo of a nation that believed in us. Silence, I realized, can also be a kind of prayer. That night the stars returned, sharp and clear against the black sky. I sat alone for a while, thinking about the thousands of souls who had stood under this same sky throughout history, men who had fought for causes greater than themselves. Their stories felt close, almost tangible, as if the air carried their whispers. I wondered if one day others would look up and think of us the same way. That thought filled me with humility. We were part of a long, unbroken chain of courage, each link forged in sacrifice. I whispered a quiet thank you to them, and the stars seemed to listen. Morning brought with it the familiar ache of repetition: rise, move, build, endure. But there was comfort in routine. Discipline gave us direction when everything else felt uncertain. I kept my focus on the men, making sure they ate, that they rested when possible. Leadership, I'd learned, is measured not in orders given, but in care taken. A Marine who feels seen will fight harder than one who feels forgotten. I carried that truth like a compass, guiding me through the haze of endless days. We were tired, yes, but never defeated. By the end of that week, I felt something shift inside me. The island no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like a teacher. It demanded patience, unity, and humility. It stripped away pretense until all that remained was the essence of who we were. And what we were was resilient. We had become men shaped by endurance, defined not by the obstacles we faced, but by how we faced them. I knew then that victory was more than ground gained. It was the preservation of spirit, and ours against all odds still burned bright. The weight of leadership. As days turned to a blur of labor and endurance, I began to understand the burden that leadership truly carries. Every decision echoes in the hearts of the men who trust you. It's not about commanding. It's about believing that the choices you make will guide them home. Some mornings I felt that weight pressing on my shoulders like armor. Yet within it there was pride. Pride in the courage I saw each time I looked into their faces. Leadership, I realized, is not about being fearless. It's about standing steady, so others can find their footing when the ground begins to shift. I found strength in the smallest gestures, the nod of a Marine passing by, the quiet thank you whispered when no one else could hear. Those moments were reminders that humanity still lived within this struggle. The island could test our endurance, but it could not take away our compassion. Sometimes I'd watch a man share his last sip of water, or tear a patch from his own uniform to help another. Those acts of kindness were invisible medals, far greater than any honor I could ever wear. They proved that even in hardship, decency endures. In rare moments of calm, I wrote in my small notebook, short lines, half thoughts, pieces of prayer. I wrote about faith, about hope, about the beauty hidden in perseverance. Writing helped me make sense of the silence. Each word was a reminder that reflection was as vital as strength. You fight harder when you understand why. And my why was simple: to see home again, to ensure that others would have the freedom to live without fear. Those words became my anchor when the world around me felt too vast to comprehend. There were times when exhaustion threatened to hollow me out. My body would ache, my mind drift to memories of Lena and the life waiting beyond the horizon. I could almost hear her voice telling me to keep my head high, to remember who I was before the uniform. That memory steadied me more than any order ever could. Love, I learned, is not a weakness. It's the purest form of courage. It reminds you of what's at stake, of the world worth protecting. And in that love I found renewal each day. As we continued onward, I noticed how the island changed around us. What had once felt hostile now seemed strangely quiet, almost respectful. Perhaps it recognized our resolve. Nature has a way of testing men until it knows their limits, and then it gives them back a piece of peace. I began to see beauty even in the harshness, the glint of morning light on sand, the rhythm of boots moving in unison, the sigh of wind across the hills. It was as if the island itself whispered, "You have earned this stillness." Evenings became our sanctuary. We'd sit together, sharing stories of home. Some spoke of mountains and rivers, others of city streets alive with music and lights. For a while, those stories replaced fear with warmth. I told them about New Jersey, about long drives on open roads, about Lena's laughter echoing through the house. Those moments reminded us that life continues beyond the horizon, that someday these memories of hardship would become proof of endurance. The men listened closely, as if hope itself was something you could pass around a fire. Every now and then I'd catch myself wondering how history would remember this battle. Would they see the faces behind the victory, or just the headlines? I hoped they'd remember the quiet courage, the men who kept going when no one was watching. History tends to glorify moments, but real heroism lives in the spaces between them, the patience, the compassion, the silent prayers whispered into empty air. I promised myself that if I ever made it home, I'd tell that story. The story of ordinary men who proved that greatness is built on humility. That night, as I looked toward the dark horizon, I felt a calm I hadn't known in weeks. The ocean stretched endless and silent, reflecting the faint glow of the stars. I realized that courage and peace can live side by side, that even amidst uncertainty, faith endures. We had come so far together, bound by duty and love of country. I whispered a final prayer for the night, not for safety but for strength. Strength to see tomorrow, to carry one another through and to keep the light of hope alive. Bonds of brotherhood. By the time the next dawn arrived, something had shifted among us. The exhaustion was still there, but it had turned into something steadier, an unspoken bond stronger than any words. We had become brothers in the truest sense, connected not by blood but by belief. Every man beside me carried the same flame of purpose, the same unyielding will to protect one another. Brotherhood is forged not in comfort but in endurance. It's the understanding that no matter what comes, you'll stand for the man next to you. That trust became our greatest weapon, and it carried us through the longest days. I often thought of how strange it was that war, in all its darkness, could reveal the brightest parts of human nature. It showed us what truly mattered: loyalty, sacrifice, compassion. We learned to share everything, our strength, our hope, even our silence. The men no longer needed orders from me. They understood each other instinctively. A glance, a nod, a breath was enough. That kind of unity can't be trained. It's earned through shared struggle. And I realized then that we were no longer just fighting for victory. We were fighting to honor the bond we had built. During a rare moment of rest, I walked among the men and watched them talk softly, trading small stories of their lives. Some spoke of family farms, others of city streets filled with laughter and light. Those stories reminded me of the mosaic that is America. So many voices, so many dreams, all bound together by a single promise: freedom. I thought about how beautiful that promise was, how fragile, how sacred. Every hardship we faced out here was a small price to pay for preserving it. In that thought I found peace, even amidst the noise of uncertainty. That night I sat with one of the younger Marines, a boy who reminded me of myself years ago. He asked if courage ever gets easier. I told him the truth: it doesn't. Courage never becomes comfortable. It just becomes familiar. It's the steady choice to stand when everything tells you to sit down. He nodded, understanding more than words could convey. We talked until the stars blurred above us, two men sharing silence between sentences. When he finally drifted to sleep, I looked at him and felt the quiet pride of a teacher who knows his lessons will outlast him. The days that followed were filled with effort and reflection. I found myself thinking often about the nature of duty. People talk about patriotism as if it's a flag you carry, but it's more than that. It's a way of living. It's the quiet willingness to give of yourself, not because you have to, but because you believe in something bigger than your own life. Out here, that belief became as vital as air. It kept us moving when fatigue clawed at our bones. It reminded us that every act of endurance was a tribute to those who had come before. In the evenings, when the light softened and the world turned gold, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the men beside me, for the purpose we shared, for the privilege of standing where so many had stood before. I thought of my father, who had taught me that real strength is quiet and enduring, that honor lives in what we do when no one is watching. I hoped I was making him proud. The island had stripped away every illusion of heroism and left behind only truth. And in that truth, I found clarity. Sometimes when I closed my eyes, I could still hear the hum of life back home, the whistle of trains, the chatter of people in the streets, the music drifting from open windows. Those sounds felt a world away, yet they fueled me in ways I couldn't explain. It reminded me why we were here, so that those sounds could continue unbroken and free. Every man beside me carried his own version of that memory, a reason to endure, a reason to hope. It was those quiet reminders of normal life that gave us the courage to face each new dawn. As the sun set once more, casting long shadows across the island, I felt a rare stillness settle over me. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to simply breathe, to exist without fear or duty for a single moment. The sky above burned in hues of orange and red, a reminder that beauty can survive even in places scarred by hardship. I thought of Lena, of home, of peace, and whispered into the wind, "We're getting closer." The island didn't answer, but somehow I knew it heard me, the meaning of sacrifice. The following morning carried a quiet stillness, the kind that comes before realization. I woke early and walked a short distance away from camp, letting the sea breeze brush against my face. For the first time, I didn't think of what was behind us or ahead. I thought about the present, the simple act of being alive in this moment. Survival isn't just about breath and heartbeat. It's about purpose. I realized that sacrifice isn't loss. It's the act of giving meaning to the moments others will live after us. That thought stayed with me like a steady flame, guiding me through the hours that followed. I began writing more in my notebook, filling its pages with pieces of thought and memory. I wrote about the men, about the lessons they taught me without knowing. There was the quiet one who always gave his rations away, the one who prayed out loud every morning, the one who told jokes to ease the weight of fear. Each of them carried light in their own way. I wanted their names to live on, not just in history books but in hearts. It struck me then that remembrance is the truest kind of immortality, a legacy built not from victory, but from virtue. As the day warmed, I found myself reflecting on how different this war felt compared to the last. Guadalcanal had been chaos, raw and immediate. Here everything felt more deliberate, like destiny itself was testing us. I had grown older, but with age came clarity. I no longer fought for medals or recognition. I fought for the quiet dignity of doing what was right. Duty isn't glorious, it's sacred. It's the steady choice to serve even when no one sees you. I hoped the younger Marines would one day understand that, not through words, but through the lives they lived afterward. In the afternoon, I walked along the ridge, looking out over the sea. The horizon stretched endlessly, and for a moment I imagined ships sailing home, carrying men who had seen too much yet still believed in hope. That image brought peace to my heart. I thought about what freedom really means. It isn't about flags or parades, but about the simple ability to dream without fear. Every man here was fighting for that dream, whether he realized it or not. It was humbling to know we were all threads in a tapestry far greater than ourselves. That evening, as we shared a quiet meal, I noticed how the conversations had changed. No one talked about home in detail anymore. We spoke instead of purpose. It wasn't that we'd forgotten where we came from. It was that we had become part of something larger. Our stories no longer belonged to us alone. They belonged to one another, to the history we were shaping. I told the men that courage wasn't just about surviving the day. It was about preserving kindness, even in the hardest hours. They nodded, and for a long time, we simply sat in silence, listening to the rhythm of the wind. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat beneath the open sky, watching clouds drift across the stars. There was something eternal about the stillness. I thought about all the men who had fought before me, about the unbroken chain of service that connected us across time. We all shared the same heartbeat, the same hope, to protect, to endure, to return. I realized then that war may shape us, but it does not define us. What defines us is what we carry forward: compassion, resilience, and the will to keep living in honor of those who could not. At dawn, I wrote another entry in my notebook. "If I fall," I began, "let my life be a bridge between those who came before and those who will come after." The words felt heavy but right. I didn't fear death anymore. I feared forgetting what mattered. Every day on this island reminded me that heroism isn't a moment. It's a lifetime of choices made for others. When the men gathered their gear, I stood beside them with renewed strength. We weren't just soldiers anymore. We were witnesses to the truth that freedom demands both courage and compassion. As the sun climbed high, we began another march across the rocky ground. The air shimmered with heat, but our steps were steady. I looked at the faces around me, dust-covered, weary yet resolute, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. These men, these brothers, were the finest I had ever known. Together we had discovered that sacrifice is not about giving up life. It's about giving it meaning. As the horizon glowed before us, I whispered a silent prayer. May we never forget why we came here, nor the promise we carry. Letters to tomorrow as the days stretched on. I began writing letters I knew might never be sent. Each one was a conversation with the future, a promise that what we did here would not be forgotten. So I wrote to Lena first, telling her that every thought of her gave me strength, that love had been my compass through the darkest moments. Then I wrote to the men who would come after us, reminding them that courage isn't born from certainty, but from conviction. I wanted them to know that our sacrifices were not in vain, that we believed in a brighter dawn beyond the smoke and silence. The act of writing became a kind of prayer. The scratch of pencil against paper steadied my heart, gave rhythm to my thoughts. I told stories of laughter amidst hardship, of hope blooming in unlikely places. I wrote about how even the smallest act of kindness could outshine despair. Sometimes I'd stop mid-sentence and just look at the sky, letting the words settle in my mind before continuing. There was something sacred about those moments, something eternal. I wasn't writing just for Lena anymore. I was writing for anyone who needed to remember that humanity endures, even in hardship. During one of those evenings, I found myself reflecting on what peace might look like after all this. I imagined families gathered around dinner tables again, children playing freely, the sound of music returning to city streets. Those images felt distant yet possible. That's the thing about hope, it's stubborn. It refuses to die even in the harshest places. I realized that we were fighting not for a perfect world, but for the right to dream of one. That dream was worth every step, every sacrifice, every breath. And so even when exhaustion weighed on us, hope lifted us forward. The men around me started sharing their own letters too. Some read them aloud, others tucked them away quietly. Each word carried a lifetime of meaning, written by hands that trembled not from fear but from love. Listening to them reminded me that no matter how far from home we were, our hearts remained connected. We fought not because we wanted to, but because we had to, because love demands protection. In that shared understanding, I saw the best of humanity shining through the dust and weariness of war. It was humbling and it was beautiful. That night, as I folded my last letter, I wrote one final line. If tomorrow never comes, know that I believed. I didn't mean just in victory, I meant in the goodness of people, in the endurance of the human spirit. The island had taken so much from us, yet it had also given something back, perspective. It taught us that true strength isn't in the hands that fight, but in the hearts that keep faith alive. As I sealed that letter, I realized it wasn't a farewell. It was a message of continuation, a bridge from sacrifice to hope. The next morning, the world felt different. The sky was clear, painted in shades of pale gold, and the air carried a rare softness. For a moment the island seemed almost gentle. I took that as a sign, a whisper that peace was not so far away. The men moved quietly, each lost in thought. There was no need for words. We understood each other in silence. I found myself smiling, not because we were finished, but because we had endured. The human spirit, once tested, reveals its deepest beauty in endurance. I carried those letters with me everywhere I went, tucked close to my chest. They became more than paper. They became reminders of who we were fighting for and why. Sometimes, during moments of stillness, I'd touch them lightly, as if to draw strength from the lives they represented. It amazed me how something so small could hold so much power. Words can't stop bullets, but they can keep hearts alive. They can carry faith farther than any weapon ever could. And in that simple truth, I found a quiet kind of victory. That evening, as the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the world in crimson light, I whispered a final thought to the wind. May these words reach beyond time. I hope that someday someone would read them, not as records of war, but as testaments of love, courage, and endurance. The island faded into shadow, but within that darkness I saw something bright, the reflection of every soul who had stood and believed. Hope, I realized, is not something we find. It's something we create again and again, even in the darkest places, echoes of home. The days began to cool slightly, though the air still carried the scent of dust and salt. Each morning I thought of home more vividly. The sound of a screen door closing, the smell of coffee drifting through an open window, the warmth of sunlight on familiar streets. Memory became a refuge, a place untouched by hardship. Sometimes I'd close my eyes and picture Lena standing on the porch, waiting, her smile brighter than any sunrise. Those moments reminded me that hope doesn't just live in the future. It lives in remembrance. Every step forward was a step toward returning to that light. I spoke often with the younger Marines about life after the war. Some wanted to build houses, others dreamed of becoming teachers or mechanics. Their plans were humble but filled with meaning. Listening to them made me realize how precious ordinary dreams are, the kind most people take for granted. Out here, simplicity became sacred. A hot meal, a full night's rest, a letter from home. Each felt like a miracle. I promised myself that if I made it back, I'd never overlook such blessings again. The war was teaching us not just how to survive, but how to truly value life. During quiet hours, I found myself drawn to the sea. The waves seemed endless, whispering in rhythms older than any war. Watching them reminded me that the world endures beyond conflict. No matter how fierce the storm, the tide always returns. I took comfort in that truth. The ocean didn't judge, didn't question, it simply continued. I realized that's what we were doing too, continuing. We carried the weight of sacrifice, but beneath it, there was grace. Every sunrise proved that resilience is the natural state of the human soul. One evening, a Marine named Carter played a harmonica he'd kept hidden in his pack. The notes floated through the camp, soft and haunting, mingling with the rhythm of the wind. For a few minutes, we weren't soldiers. We were just men listening to music that sounded like home. I closed my eyes and let the melody wash over me. It was a reminder that beauty can survive even in desolation. When the song ended, no one spoke. We didn't need to. That small moment of peace said everything words never could. I started collecting small things from the island. Smooth stones, fragments of driftwood, bits of glass polished by the sea. Each piece held a story, a memory of endurance. I planned to take them home, not as trophies, but as symbols of resilience. They would remind me that even in the harshest places, there is always something that endures. As I held them in my hand, I thought about how the world changes yet remains the same. Time erodes everything except the spirit. That realization made me feel infinite, if only for a breath. When letters finally arrived again, I opened one from Lena with trembling hands. She wrote about planting a garden, about how the first flowers had begun to bloom. When you come home, she wrote, we'll watch them grow together. Her words painted a picture of peace so vivid I could almost smell the earth. I folded the letter carefully and placed it near my heart. That single promise, a garden waiting, life beginning again, became my compass. Hope doesn't need to shout. It only needs to whisper, I'll be here when you return. The men began talking about home more often too, not with longing but with quiet determination. We spoke of rebuilding, of telling our stories truthfully so that others would understand the cost of freedom. I told them that when they looked back, they shouldn't see just hardship. They should see the courage that carried them through it. Every hardship we faced was proof of our devotion to something eternal. The thought filled me with a calm pride. We weren't just living history. We were ensuring its meaning would last. That night, I sat alone by the edge of camp, watching the stars bloom across the sky. They looked the same as they did back home, a reminder that no matter how far you go, some things never change. I thought about all we'd lost and all we'd gained, about how pain and purpose can coexist. The island had taught me that peace isn't the absence of struggle, it's the grace to endure it. As I gazed upward, I whispered, "We're almost there." Whether I meant home, victory, or something beyond, I didn't know. But I believed it. The long vigil morning broke quietly, the air cooler than usual, touched by a soft breeze. I stood watching the horizon, where the sun lifted through a thin veil of mist. Every dawn now felt like a small promise kept. Another day alive, another chance to hold fast to purpose. The men stirred behind me, their voices low and measured. Even in exhaustion, there was grace in their movements. I realized that endurance itself had become our language. We no longer needed to speak of courage. We lived it in the rhythm of every breath, every step, every act of perseverance that carried us forward. We had learned to read silence the way others read words. A glance, a shift of weight, a faint smile, all spoke volumes. In those quiet exchanges, we found comfort. Brotherhood no longer required grand gestures. It existed in the way we looked after one another without asking. I began to think that maybe this was what humanity truly meant. Compassion born from shared hardship. I knew then that when we returned home, the world would seem louder, faster, but perhaps emptier too. Out here every heartbeat mattered, because it reminded us we still belonged to something eternal. Sometimes, in the still hours before dawn, I felt the island breathe beneath us. The wind moved through the sparse grass like a sigh, and the sea whispered against the rocks. Nature, indifferent yet steady, had become our silent companion. I took comfort in its constancy. The earth didn't mourn or celebrate. It simply endured. That realization humbled me. I wondered if we too could learn that quiet endurance, to live without bitterness, to rebuild without hatred. The island had taken much from us, but it had also taught us resilience. In its silence, it was teaching us how to heal. A few nights later, the men shared stories again. This time, laughter came easier, the kind that starts small but spreads quickly, warming even the coldest spirits. Hearing it reminded me of the sound of summer evenings back home. It was proof that life persists, that even after everything, joy can return. I looked around at their faces lit by the soft glow of lanterns and thought how extraordinary it was that hope could survive here. It didn't erase the past, but it softened it, transforming pain into purpose. That laughter was the purest act of defiance we had left. I kept writing in my notebook whenever I could. The pages had become worn and smudged, but they were pieces of my soul. I wrote about the lessons the island taught me: humility, patience, gratitude. I wrote about the men and how their courage redefined what strength meant. One day, I promised myself, I would show these pages to Lena, not as stories of war, but as lessons of life. I wanted her to know that in the midst of darkness, I had found clarity, that I had seen the best of humanity rise from its most difficult hour. As another day ended, I found myself staring at the flag we had raised near camp. Its colors were faded from the salt air, but it still moved with quiet dignity. Watching it, I felt the same surge of pride I'd felt the first time I put on my uniform. That fabric represented every person who believed in the promise of freedom. It reminded me that we were not alone. An entire nation stood behind us. The flag wasn't just a symbol, it was a heartbeat, and as long as it waved, so did we. It gave me strength when words failed. I spent much of that evening walking along the shoreline. The tide had pulled the sand smooth, erasing footprints from the day before. It struck me that the sea was a kind of mercy. It erased without judgment. I thought about how we might do the same when we returned. Forgive, rebuild, and let the scars become reminders, not prisons. The horizon glowed faintly, a thin line of silver where the sea met the sky. I whispered a quiet promise into the wind. We'll come home changed but whole. The waves answered softly as if agreeing. That night I couldn't sleep, but I didn't mind. I sat watching the stars, feeling their ancient calm wrap around me. Somewhere in that vast expanse, I imagined every soul who had stood where I stood, gazing upward, wondering about tomorrow. The thought filled me with peace. We were part of something unbroken, something timeless. As long as there were stars, there would be men who dreamed beneath them. And in those dreams lived everything worth fighting for: faith, freedom, love. I closed my eyes, letting that truth carry me into morning. The weight of memory morning light spilled over the island like a quiet blessing. I stood for a long while, watching how it touched every surface: the stone, the sand, the worn fabric of our camp tents. Everything looked softer in that light, almost forgiving. The men began their morning tasks in silence, each movement deliberate, each gesture meaningful. We had been here long enough to understand that every small act was sacred. I thought about how memory works the same way. It smooths the rough edges, softens what once felt unbearable. Perhaps that's how healing begins, in the light that refuses to fade. The island was still, but my mind was restless. I kept replaying moments from home in my head: the sound of rain on the porch roof, Lena humming in the kitchen, the way the world felt simple before I knew its weight. I wondered if I'd be able to return to that simplicity, or if war had changed me too much. I realized then that you can't return unchanged, and maybe you're not supposed to. We carry pieces of the places that shape us, just as they carry pieces of us. The island would never forget us, and we would never forget it. Later that day, I walked among the men as they worked. Their faces were leaner now, their movements slower, but their eyes were steady. They didn't talk much anymore. Words had given way to understanding. I could read everything I needed in a single look: fatigue, resolve, trust. It struck me how deeply we had come to know one another, without speaking. That's the kind of bond that endures beyond time and distance. When this was all over, even years apart, I knew that one glance would be enough to remember everything we had shared. I spent that afternoon by the shoreline again, sketching in the sand with a stick. I drew the shape of a house, a tree beside it, a small figure standing at the door. I imagined Lena there waiting. For a moment I allowed myself to feel something like peace. The ocean breeze erased my drawing almost immediately, but that didn't bother me. It reminded me that some things aren't meant to last. They're meant to be felt, then carried within. The heart remembers better than the earth does. That's where true memory lives, not in stone but in spirit. That evening a quiet conversation rose among the men about what we'd tell people back home. One asked if we'd speak of the hardship, the fear. I told them we'd speak of the courage instead, not to hide the truth but to honor it. Suffering may be part of war, but it's not its story. The real story is about endurance, about how people find light in the darkest corners. We decided that our memories would not be tales of despair. They would be proof that hope survives anything. That decision felt like its own kind of victory. As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in deep amber and rose, I felt the island quiet again. The wind carried faint echoes of laughter from the camp. It was strange how quickly peace could follow struggle, how easily the world could turn gentle after being harsh. I wondered if that's how life always is, a rhythm between chaos and calm. Maybe that's what gives it meaning, the knowledge that no storm lasts forever. In that fading light, I found a stillness I hadn't felt in months. For the first time, it felt like the island was letting us rest. I sat outside long after night fell, listening to the distant hum of the sea. My thoughts drifted toward the future, what we'd rebuild, what we'd teach. I wanted people to know that freedom isn't a gift handed down. It's a living promise renewed through sacrifice. I wanted them to see beyond the uniforms and medals, to the human hearts that carried those burdens. If I could give them anything, it would be that understanding, that liberty has a heartbeat and it's powered by ordinary men who chose to believe in something greater than themselves. Before sleeping, I wrote one more note in my notebook. When I go home, I will plant something that grows. I didn't know if it would be a tree, a flower, or something else, but I knew it would be alive. Growth felt like the best way to honor all we had endured, to take the lessons of hardship and turn them into something beautiful. I closed the notebook and placed it beside me, feeling the pulse of life within its worn pages. Tomorrow would come, and we would face it the same way we faced everything else, with quiet, unshakable faith. The quiet. Within. The next morning began with a kind of hush I hadn't felt before. The air was still, the sky pale and endless. For the first time, the island didn't feel like a battleground. It felt like a place remembering itself. I stood for a long time, breathing deeply, letting that silence settle inside me. The world felt different now, smaller, quieter, but somehow fuller too. Every sound, every movement carried meaning. I realized that peace doesn't arrive like thunder. It comes softly, almost shyly, after you've learned how to listen. I had been waiting for this silence, and now I understood it. As the men stirred, there was no rush, no urgency. Our pace had slowed, our voices gentler. We spoke of practical things, supplies, repairs, but beneath the surface we all knew what this calm meant. It was the moment after endurance, the breath before rebuilding. I saw it in their faces, a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. After so much struggle, peace almost felt foreign, yet it was welcome all the same. The island had tested us, shaped us, stripped us down to our truest selves. What remained was simple but unbreakable, faith in each other. Later that morning I took a walk along the ridge that overlooked the sea. The water shimmered under the rising sun, and for a moment I thought of home not as a distant dream but as something within reach. I imagined stepping through my front door again, hearing Lena's voice, feeling her embrace. The thought filled me with both joy and humility. I had carried that image with me through every hardship, and now it guided me toward peace. Sometimes the strongest anchors are invisible, the memories that remind you of who you are. I met with a few of the men that afternoon to discuss what came next. There was a sense of closure in our words, a mutual understanding that our duty wasn't over. It was simply changing shape. We talked about what we'd do when we returned home, how we'd carry the lessons we'd learned. Some wanted to farm, others to teach. One even said he wanted to write a book. I told them they should. The world needs stories of endurance, stories that remind people that peace is built, not found. They agreed, and in that shared conviction I saw the first seeds of healing. As evening approached, we gathered one last time around a small fire. The flames danced softly, painting the men's faces in gold and shadow. I listened as they spoke, quietly, reverently, about the people they loved, the moments they missed. There was laughter too, light and easy, like music returning after a long silence. I felt my chest tighten, not with sorrow but with gratitude. We had made it through together. We had become a family forged by trial and trust. I knew that long after this war was over, we'd carry this bond with us, unspoken but eternal. When the fire burned low, I took out my notebook again. The pages were nearly full now, each one a fragment of memory and meaning. I wrote a final entry for the day. Peace is not the end of struggle. It's the promise that struggle was worth it. The words felt right, like a closing line to a story still unfolding. I knew there would be more to write, there always is, but for that moment I let myself rest in the truth of it. The night was calm, the stars steady, and for the first time in a long while I felt truly at ease. That night I dreamed of home, not the home I had left, but the one I would return to, a place shaped by all I had learned. In the dream the world was quiet, the fields green, and Lena was there, smiling, as if she had been waiting all along. I woke before dawn, the memory of that dream lingering like warmth. It felt less like fantasy and more like promise. I knew then that everything we had endured had meaning. It wasn't just about survival, it was about becoming worthy of the peace we'd fought for. At sunrise I stood once more by the flag. The wind caught its edges and lifted it high, its movement slow but steady. I placed my hand over my heart, not out of ritual but gratitude. This symbol, this simple piece of cloth, carried the stories of every man who had believed in something beyond himself. I whispered a prayer, not for victory but for understanding, for the strength to carry peace with the same courage we carried duty. The flag stirred again, and in its motion, I felt the pulse of everything we had fought for still alive within me. A nation in the heart as the days passed. I found myself thinking more about what it meant to represent a nation. The flag, the anthem, the oaths, all of them were symbols, yes, but their meaning lived in the hearts of ordinary people. I realized that America wasn't just a place on a map. It was a spirit carried by those who believed in it, no matter where they stood. Each Marine beside me was proof of that spirit. We came from different towns, different families, but our purpose was one and the same. We weren't fighting for land, we were fighting for an idea. Freedom lived in unity. I thought about my parents, immigrants who had come to America with nothing but hope. My father used to say that the measure of a man is found not in what he takes, but in what he gives. Those words echoed in me now more than ever. I wanted to give back to the country that had given my family a chance to dream. That was why I enlisted, why I stayed, why I endured. The promise of America isn't perfection, it's perseverance. It's the belief that no matter how dark the world becomes, we can always build something brighter together. One afternoon I spoke to the younger men about what patriotism meant. I told them it wasn't about grand speeches or glory. It was about compassion, responsibility and humility. True love of country means wanting it to be better than it is, and working every day to make it so. They listened quietly, their faces reflecting the same determination I had once seen in myself. I told them that courage is only half the battle. Kindness is the other half. Without one, the other is hollow. They nodded, and I knew they understood. That understanding would outlast any battle. Later that evening, I walked to the water's edge. The tide was low and the sea glittered under the fading light. I thought of how this ocean connected us to home, how it carried both distance and belonging. Somewhere across it, families were waiting, unaware of the quiet strength that sustained us here. I whispered to the horizon, "We're coming home." Not as a promise of return, but as a prayer that our nation would always remember what it took to stay free. The waves answered in rhythm, soft and endless, like the heartbeat of the land we loved. That night, the men shared stories about what they missed most about America. Some spoke of mountains, others of city lights, a few of quiet front porches at dusk. Listening to them, I realized that home isn't defined by geography, it's defined by memory and hope. Each story painted a piece of the country we carried in our hearts. Together, those pieces formed something greater than any map could show. That was America to me, a living mosaic of dreams stitched together by belief. And in that realization, I found both peace and pride. I spent the next morning helping one of the men repair a radio. The signal was faint, but after a while a voice broke through. News from home. It spoke of progress, of faith, of people holding fast. The sound of that voice felt like sunlight after a long storm. We listened in silence, smiles spreading slowly across tired faces. In that moment, the distance between us and home disappeared. We were reminded that what we did here mattered, that every sacrifice was building a tomorrow someone else could live freely in. That thought filled the air like oxygen. That evening, I looked around our small camp and saw how far we'd come. The men were different now, not harder but deeper. Their laughter was quieter but more genuine, their eyes older but clearer. We had learned to live not for ourselves but for one another. That's what a nation truly is, a collection of hearts that beat together, each one willing to give so that others might thrive. I felt honored to have shared this journey with them, to have witnessed the strength of America, not in its monuments but in its people. Before sleep, I opened my notebook again. I wrote, "A nation is not defined by borders but by belief. It lives wherever people choose courage over comfort, unity over division, and love over fear." I stared at those words for a long time, letting them sink in. They weren't just thoughts. They were a reflection of everything we had lived. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but we had already proven that we could endure anything together. As I closed the notebook, I whispered a quiet thank you to my brothers, to my country, and to the faith that carried us all. Lessons of the island each sunrise began to feel like a teacher. The island no longer seemed harsh. It felt patient, almost kind, as though it had been waiting for us to understand something deeper. I watched light spill across the ridges and thought about renewal. Even here, where hardship had carved its mark, life kept returning, grasses pushing through ash, birds gliding over the surf. I realized the earth always chooses life. Perhaps we are meant to do the same. Hope, like the tide, retreats but never disappears. It simply gathers strength before finding its way back to shore. The men spoke less now, but their silences were full of meaning. We no longer needed to define courage. We had lived it until it became instinct. The youngest Marines had grown into leaders without noticing. I watched them help each other, share what little they had, and thought how the best legacies are built quietly. None of us would ever be the same, but maybe that was the point. The world needs changed men, men who understand the price of peace. That understanding is what transforms struggle into purpose and pain into wisdom. One afternoon I climbed the highest rise and looked out toward the horizon. The sea stretched endless, the sky wide and blue. For a moment I felt small but not insignificant. We are tiny pieces in a grand design, yet every choice we make ripples outward. I thought of Lena planting her garden, of children laughing somewhere far away. All of it existed because people kept believing, kept giving. The thought steadied me. It reminded me that the truest victories are invisible, the quiet continuance of ordinary life made possible by extraordinary endurance. That evening I walked through camp and felt a calm I hadn't known before. The men were writing letters, repairing gear, cleaning weapons they might never need again. There was dignity in every movement. We had been forged by endurance, tempered by compassion. The island had taken much, but it had given us clarity. I realized that heroism isn't found in a single act. It's found in consistency, in the daily choice to keep faith when the world trembles. And faith, I've learned, doesn't ask for perfection, only persistence. I sat with Carter as the sun went down. He asked what I would do when I got home. I told him I wanted to build something lasting, maybe a small place near the water, somewhere quiet enough to hear the wind. I said I'd teach young Marines that strength isn't about force. It's about understanding. He smiled and said he wanted to do the same. In that moment, I saw how the torch passes, not through ceremony but through conversation. One generation planting seeds so the next can grow taller. That, I think, is the truest inheritance of service. Night settled slowly, stars gathering like old friends above us. I thought about the word freedom and how it had changed meaning for me. It was no longer a distant ideal. It was something tangible, earned breath by breath. Freedom isn't loud. It's quiet, steady, patient. It lives in the way people treat one another, in the mercy they extend, in the dreams they protect. We had safeguarded that mercy here, even when the world felt merciless. That realization filled me with gratitude deeper than words could hold. I opened my notebook again and wrote, "Peace must be practiced daily." Like faith. The sentence felt incomplete, so I added, "And both require courage." I smiled at the simplicity of it. War had taught me many lessons, but none greater than that. Courage isn't noise or fury. It's quiet endurance, the willingness to hope again each morning. I wanted to carry that lesson into every day that followed, to live gently but firmly, like the tide that shapes stone without breaking it. That, I decided, would be my new kind of strength. As the camp lights dimmed, I looked once more toward the ocean. The horizon shimmered faintly, silver and blue, endless as faith itself. Tomorrow would bring departure and with it, uncertainty. Yet I felt ready. The island had given me everything I needed. Perspective, humility, and the quiet knowledge that peace is possible even after chaos. I whispered a final thought into the wind. May we never forget. The breeze carried it away, blending my voice with the countless others who had spoken hope into this same sea. It was enough. The journey home. The morning of departure came with pale light creeping across the horizon. The ocean that had once carried us into uncertainty now waited to take us home. I stood by the shore, boots sinking slightly into the damp sand, and listened to the rhythmic pull of the tide. Each wave seemed to echo a heartbeat, steady and alive. Around me the men moved with unspoken grace, packing gear, folding tents, shaking hands. No one celebrated. Instead, there was reverence. We were leaving a chapter of ourselves behind, one written in endurance and quiet belief. As the boats approached, I looked back at the island one last time. Its ridges were softened by distance, its silence almost tender. I realized that every hardship we had faced here had been a teacher. The lessons were carved not into the ground but into us. Patience, compassion, unity. I whispered a silent thank you, not for victory but for understanding. We had come seeking duty and found meaning. The island would fade from view soon, but it would live on in our hearts, shaping the way we spoke, loved and remembered. Boarding the transport felt strangely calm. The deck beneath my boots hummed with life again, the scent of salt filling the air. The younger Marines gazed back at the receding shore, some smiling, some silent. I stood beside them and felt an unexpected peace. The sea no longer frightened me. It felt like home, vast, patient, forgiving. I thought of how journeys never truly end. They just change direction. We were not returning as the men who had arrived. We were carrying the island within us, its strength woven into every heartbeat. During the voyage, the days blurred into soft motion. The horizon stretched unbroken, and the sound of engines became a lullaby. I spent hours on deck, writing again in my notebook. My words were no longer about war, but about renewal, about how faith rebuilds what fear destroys. I wrote that peace is not granted by victory, but built by understanding. The men read my pages aloud sometimes, nodding quietly. We all felt the truth of it, that what awaited us was not just home, but responsibility, the duty to live with the same courage we had fought with. At night, I'd look up at the stars and imagine Lena doing the same. The sky was the one constant between us, a bridge across time and distance. I thought about her garden, about the flowers she had written of, blooming stubbornly through the spring. That image gave me hope, life continuing quietly, persistently. I realized that love is its own kind of endurance. It asks for patience, faith, and the willingness to begin again, no matter how much the world changes. I promised myself that when I returned, I would live by that same resilience. One evening, Carter joined me on deck. He asked if I thought the world would ever truly know what it cost to preserve freedom. I told him maybe not, and maybe it shouldn't. Perhaps the greatest victories are those unseen, carried silently in the hearts of those who lived them. He nodded, and together we watched the moon rise, its reflection trembling across the water. It struck me then that history isn't just written in books. It's written in the quiet choices of ordinary people who keep believing in something better. When the coastline finally appeared, a faint line of green against blue, no one spoke for a long time. The men simply watched, tears glinting in tired eyes. Home. The word felt sacred, heavier than I remembered, filled with gratitude. Every sound, every color seemed brighter, alive. I thought of all who wouldn't return, and whispered a promise that we'd carry their memory with us in everything we did. The ship moved closer, and I felt the weight of the years lift, replaced by the gentle burden of remembrance. We had survived, but more than that, we had learned. As the anchor dropped and the harbor opened before us, I closed my notebook one final time. Its pages were full now, not of war but of life, of lessons carved from struggle and shaped by love. I pressed it to my chest and took a deep breath. The wind smelled of earth and rain, of home. I thought of Lena waiting, of the garden blooming, of the promise we had all made to protect, to endure, to rebuild. I stepped forward, whispering the words that had guided me through every storm. For home, for peace, for tomorrow. Epilogue. The measure of a man, I stand here now. Years later, the sea once again stretching before me, calm and endless. Time has softened the edges of memory, but never the meaning. I still hear the voices of the men I served beside, still feel the weight of the flag we carried in our hearts. When I close my eyes, I can see their faces illuminated by dawn, tired, proud, unbroken. They remind me every day that freedom is not a gift preserved by words alone. It is a living promise renewed through courage. And courage, I've learned, is the quiet choice to believe when belief feels impossible. I have returned home, but part of me will always remain on that island, among the wind and waves where faith was tested and born again. The world has changed, yet the lessons endure. Peace must be tended like a garden, nurtured with patience, forgiveness, and care. It grows not from victory, but from understanding. Every sunrise feels like a second chance to live with purpose, to honor those who can no longer see the dawn. I wake each day grateful for the chance to build, to love, and to remember. Sometimes I walk along the shore near my home and feel the same breeze that once swept across Iwo Jima. I close my eyes and listen. The wind still carries their echoes, soft and strong. They remind me that sacrifice is not an end but a beginning, a seed planted so others may live freely. That truth is what gives every hardship meaning, what transforms loss into legacy. And though years have passed, I know their spirit still guards the heart of our nation. So when people ask what I took from the war, I tell them this. I learned that true strength has nothing to do with power. It lives in compassion, in endurance, in the love that binds us through the hardest nights. It lives in the hand that helps another stand. It lives in the quiet faith that tomorrow can always be better. That to me is the measure of a man, and the measure of a country. To every soul who has served, to every family who has waited, to every dream that has survived the storm, know this. Your courage lights the path for all who follow. History may remember the battles, but I will always remember the hearts. And as long as there are those willing to hope, America will endure, not as a place but as a promise. War reveals the worst of the world, but also the best of humanity. The story of Iwo Jima isn't one of destruction, it's one of endurance, compassion, and faith. It teaches us that peace is not the absence of struggle, but the triumph of spirit. The true heroes are not those who seek glory, but those who act with quiet conviction. Their legacy lives not in monuments, but in the freedom we wake to each morning. Thank you for honoring their memory through this story. May we live every day worthy of the peace they earned.